What if I told you that the most powerful voice in a nation didn't come from a general, a minister, or even a president, but from a barefoot orphan girl found beside a grave? In a world drowning in politics, one child asked a question that changed everything. No superpowers, no spotlight, just courage and truth. This is the true story of how a poor orphan named Divine saved President Ibrahim Torians from betrayal, corruption, and even death. Set in the fictional African nation of Cambora, this viral, heartbreaking, and inspiring journey will leave you speechless. From the cemetery to the center of power, and from whispers of curses to cheers of a grateful people. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll never underestimate the heart of a child again. Subscribe now. Watch until the end. And if this story moves you, share it. Let the world hear the name Divine. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning in the capital city of Cambora. The sun rose slowly over the rooftops, painting the dusty skyline in shades of gold and orange. President Ibrahim Torians, barely 40 and already known for his fierce discipline and unshakable principles, had just stepped out of a high-security meeting. His motorcade was ready, waiting to escort him to a public event where smiling cameras and practiced speeches awaited. But something in him stirred. An instinct, a whisper. "Take the old cemetery road," he told his driver, almost under his breath. "Isay." Guards looked at each other, confused, concerned. That road hadn't been used by government convoys in years. "Sir, it's not the safest area," one whispered. "I know," Torians replied, eyes fixed ahead. "But I need to go there." So the armored cars turned, off the polished boulevard, onto a cracked, forgotten path. The road to the old cemetery. No crowds, no journalists, just silence, and memories buried beneath the dry earth. As they passed the gates, something unusual caught the president's eye. A small figure sitting alone beside a gravestone. "Stop the car," he said firmly. Again, puzzled glances. "Sir, this area is known for—" "I said stop." The brakes hissed. The convoy halted. President Torian stepped out, his boots crunching softly on gravel. He walked toward the girl. She looked no more than 9. Her dress was torn, her feet bare, her hair wild from nights without a pillow. But her eyes were unlike anything he had seen, wounded, but not broken, afraid, but not defeated. There was a strange fire in them. She was cleaning the grave with a piece of cloth, speaking softly to it. "Who are you visiting?" he asked, his voice low. She looked up, face dusty, but gaze sharp. "My parents," she said quietly. "Where? Do you live?" "Nowhere." She hesitated. "I sleep here." A pause. "Beside them." "What's your name?" "Divine." The president knelt down, reading the words carved into the stone. "To our loving daughter Divine, take care of your future." "They died in a fire," she added. "Since then, no one wants me. They say I bring bad luck." The air grew still. Something in Torian's chest tightened. This girl, abandoned by the world, felt more honest than the ministers he'd met that morning. He turned to his head guard. "Call the social department. I want her under my care today." "Sir, are you sure? She's a child, and she's been through enough." That evening, while the capital buzzed with politics and rumors, Divine had her first warm meal in years and slept under the roof of the presidential palace, safe, fed, seen, for the first time in a very long time. The gates of the presidential palace slowly opened. For most people, it was a symbol of power. For Divine, it was the largest thing she had ever seen. Marble steps, golden doors, shiny floors that reflected her bare feet like mirrors. Servants in uniforms greeted her with polite confusion. Some whispered, some stared. Who was this little girl? Why was she walking beside the president? But President Ibrahim Torians walked proudly, gently holding her hand. "She's staying with us," he announced. "She is under my care now." Divine said nothing. She held tightly to the small cloth in her hand. the same one she used to clean her parents' grave. Everything felt unreal, too bright, too clean, too far from the cemetery where silence was her only friend. Her room was soft and warm. A bed with pillows, sheets that smelled like flowers, curtains that danced with the breeze. Dinner was served that night on golden plates. She didn't know which spoon to use. She didn't even know meals had so many parts. She ate quietly, eyes wide, ears listening, heart still unsure. President Torian sat across from her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't rush her. He simply smiled. "You are safe here," he said. "Eat as much as you want." For the first time in many nights, Divine slept without fear. No thunder, no hunger, no whispers of ghosts or curses, just the soft sound of a lullaby echoing from a radio in the hallway. The next morning, a woman knocked gently. She introduced herself as Madame Koba, Divine's new tutor. "Today we begin small," she said warmly, "reading, writing, and a little drawing." Divine was nervous at first. She had never been to school, never held a real pencil. But Madame Koba was kind, patient. She taught her how to hold the pen, how to trace letters, how to find stories between lines. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, Divine began to smile. She still didn't talk much. She waited to be spoken to, but each day she grew more confident. She asked questions. She laughed, not loudly, but enough to light up a room. President Torians noticed. He watched from a distance, not as a leader, but as a father. He had no children of his own, no family nearby. The palace had always been full of people, but never full of life. Until Divine. He gave orders quietly to his staff. She should never feel alone again. She should always be treated with dignity. She is not just a guest, she is family. Soon Divine had clothes that fit, books with her name on them, a bed by the window where the sun woke her each morning, and a chair beside the president's office, where she often sat drawing pictures of flowers and birds. No one dared question her presence anymore. They didn't need to, because every time she walked through the hallway, even the guards nodded with a smile. From the ashes of grief, inside. The House of Power, a little girl, was learning how to live again, and something about her was about to change everything. One bright morning, Divine sat quietly in the palace garden, a notebook on her lap, a pencil in her hand, sunlight dancing across the pages as she practiced her letters. She was focused, careful. Every line mattered, just like Madame Koba taught. Then she heard voices, deep, serious, coming from the window above her. She looked up. It was the president's office. She could see him sitting behind his desk and standing in front of him. A tall man in glasses, Mr. Galrix, the president's personal assistant. He held a thick brown folder. "Sir, just the usual documents," Galrix said quickly. "Your signature is all that's needed." President Torians nodded without looking. He was already typing on his laptop. "Put them down. I'll sign now." Page after page. Signature after signature. He didn't stop to read a single word. Divine tilted her head. Something about it didn't feel right. Why sign papers without reading them? Even she knew to check her homework before giving it to Madame Koba. The same thing happened the next day, and again the day after. Always the same routine. That evening, after dinner, she quietly entered his office. Her notebook pressed to her chest. "Mr. President," she said softly. He smiled. "Divine, how many times must I tell you, call me Papa?" She smiled back. "Papa, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, closing his laptop. "Why don't you read the papers before signing them?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Well, because I trust the people who prepare them," he replied. "I have many things to do. Reading all. Those pages would take too long." Divine nodded slowly. "But what if someone writes something bad and hides it in the middle?" He laughed gently. "You've been watching too many cartoons." She didn't laugh. No, Papa, I'm serious. Even Madame Koba says we must always read before we sign anything. His smile faded. Her eyes were calm, but her words, they carried a strange weight, like she knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. I trust my assistant, he said, hesitating. He checks everything before it comes to me. Divine looked down. Then, what if the assistant is the one doing something wrong? Silence. A long, heavy silence. President Torians looked at her. This child, who used to sleep beside a grave, had just asked the most important question of his career. He leaned back in his chair. I will think about what you said. That night he could not sleep. He kept hearing her voice. What if the assistant is the one doing something wrong? It echoed like a bell in his mind. Sharp, simple, true. The next morning when Galrix walked in with the usual folder, President Torians didn't pick up his pen. Sit down, he said. Galrix blinked. Sir? Today, the president said calmly, we will go through each document together. Galrix hesitated. His fingers twitched nervously as he held the folder tighter. All of them, sir? He asked. President Torians didn't blink. Yes, he said firmly. Every single one. The assistant smiled awkwardly. Of course, sir. If you wish. For the next hour they sat side by side, one document after another, reading line by line. Everything seemed normal at first, until they reached a file marked Urgent Infrastructure Expansion. It requested a transfer of 3 billion kambas, Canberra's currency, to a company with a name the president didn't recognize. He frowned. This address doesn't exist, he muttered, and this director resigned 3 months ago. He looked up at Galrix. Who added this? Galrix stuttered. It came from the finance department. Call the finance minister, now. 30 minutes later, the truth unraveled. The project was fake, the company a ghost, the signature forged. The president turned to Galrix. You said you checked every document. Did you read this one? Galrix shifted in his seat. It must have been a mistake. No, Torian said. His voice was cold. Not a mistake. A betrayal. That afternoon, a full audit was ordered. 3 months' worth of files were pulled out and re-examined. It was worse than expected. Dozens of fraudulent transactions, millions stolen. All had passed through Galrix's hands. That evening, he was arrested. The news broke across Canberra like a thunderstorm. For months, workers had gone unpaid, projects left unfinished. Now they knew why. At the press conference the next day, cameras flashed, microphones pointed, and President Torian stepped up to the podium with a solemn face. Take full responsibility, he began, for trusting too much and reading too little. He paused, then turned slightly to his left. Standing there, shy but composed, was Divine, but the one who opened my eyes. Is someone small? Someone the world would ignore? He looked at her with pride. This young girl taught me to think again. The room went silent. From today, he continued, I will read every file before I sign. And I'm appointing Divine as my special advisor. Because wisdom so has no age. The journalist blinked, then erupted in questions. Are you serious, sir? She's just a child. I'm very serious, Torians replied. She sees what many adults miss. Divine looked up at him, wide-eyed. Me? But I don't know anything about government. You know how to think, he smiled. That's a good start. From that day forward, Divine sat in meetings. Not speaking much, but always listening, always watching. She asked questions that others were afraid to ask. Simple ones, honest ones. The kind that shook liars to their core. Ministers began preparing better. Advisors stopped rushing decisions. Even veteran staff watched their step when she entered the room. Not because she yelled, not because she punished, but because she noticed. In the heart of the palace, amid marble walls and golden chairs, a little girl with bare feet and big eyes had become the voice no one could ignore. Power attracts praise, but it also awakens envy. At first, people in the palace whispered politely, "She's smart for her age. She has good instincts." But soon, the tone began to change. "She's too quiet. She watches everything. She's not normal." In dark corners of hallways, behind closed doors, the murmurs grew louder. "She's just a child. What does she know? Why does the president trust her so much?" Some said she was lucky. Others said she was dangerous. A few began calling her the ghost child. "She came from a graveyard, didn't she? They say she talks to the dead. Maybe she's cursed." At first, Divine didn't notice. She was too focused, too busy learning, too determined to do what was right. But shadows don't always stay in whispers. Sometimes they take shape and strike. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the palace walls, Divine walked alone toward the garden. Her drawing book was still on the table where she left it earlier. She skipped down the steps. The air was cool. The leaves rustled softly. She bent down to pick up her book, then froze, a sound, soft, unnatural, like feet brushing through the grass. She looked up. Two men, dressed in staff uniforms, crawling behind the flower beds. Something in their hands. Something they were trying to hide. Her heart pounded. She screamed, loud, sharp, enough to wake the trees. A voice boomed from behind a tree. "Stop." Right there. It was one of the palace guards. He had been following at a distance just in case. The two men panicked. They ran, but not far. The guard tackled one. Other guards swarmed in. Within minutes, both men were on the ground, tied and trembling. Under questioning, the truth came out. "We were sent," one of them confessed. "A man in government, the one Divine exposed before. He wanted her gone." "Gone how?" the guard asked. "We were told to poison her tea or scare her enough to make her run away." The palace erupted. How could anyone plan to harm a child? A girl who had only tried to help? President Torians was furious. He tightened security, posted guards near her room, made sure she was never alone again. But the attacks didn't stop there. Now, they came in words. "She's cursed. She's not really a child. Maybe she's a spy from another country." The rumors reached the president. He didn't speak of them at first, until one night he received a letter. Slipped under his door, anonymous, accusing Divine of being a spirit, sent to destroy him from within. He was still reading it when Divine walked in, holding a tray. "Papa, your tea is ready," she said softly. He smiled at her, took the cup, then looked at the letter again. She noticed. "Is that about me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Do you believe it?" she asked, her voice calm. No fear, just honesty. He looked at her. This girl, who had nothing, had asked for nothing, had saved everything. He reached out, took her hand. "Divine, you've never lied to me. You saw the truth when I couldn't. You've made this palace better. And no, I don't believe them." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry, because she knew. This was only the beginning, and darkness was far from done. It was a scorching afternoon in Canberra. The sun hung heavy over the capital, but inside the palace something heavier was brewing. President Torian sat at his desk reviewing files. For once, each document was read carefully, word by word. Lesson learned, thanks to Divine. A knock came, soft, familiar. "Come in," he said. The door opened. A tall man entered with arms wide open. "Brother," he called. "Ibrahim, it's been too long." It was Eminel, the president's childhood friend. They had grown up on the same dusty street, shared the same food, played under the same trees. President Torian stood up, smiling. "Eminel, my brother," he said warmly. "Sit. You're always welcome here." But Eminel didn't sit. His eyes were hard, his voice cold. "I didn't come here for tea," he said. "I came here to talk about that girl." Torians blinked. "You mean Divine?" "Yes," Eminel snapped. The one you call your advisor. What about her? This is madness, Eminel shouted. You're a president, not a fool. How can a child sit beside you in state meetings? Are you under a spell? The room went silent. President Tarians narrowed his eyes. Watch your words, Eminel. No, I won't, Eminel said, stepping closer. That girl is not normal. She doesn't laugh. She doesn't play. She walks like she owns the place. She's a ghost. Torian stood still. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. Eminel was confused. Why are you laughing? I'm laughing, the president said, because you, Eminel, the boy who once believed in miracles, now believes in nonsense. So I'm a fool now? Eminel asked, voice rising. Yes, Torians replied calmly. You came into my office to insult a child, to insult my daughter, and suggest I need cleansing? She's not your daughter, Eminel roared. Open your eyes! The president's voice dropped to ice. Get out! Eminel clenched his fists. You'll regret this. I already regret letting you in, Tarians replied, turning his back. Eminel stormed out. But he didn't go far. That night, in a dimly lit room, Eminel met with another man, a face known only in shadows, a high-ranking official, the same one Divine had exposed before. The man lit a cigarette. You finally see it too? He asked. Eminel nodded. She's turned him against me. She's turned him against all of us, the man growled. Before we had access, we had control. Now she blocks everything. Eminel's eyes narrowed. He listens to her like she's his god. The man smiled. Then we remove them both. Eminel hesitated. He's still my friend. Then, stay his friend, the man said coldly, and watch him destroy everything you ever built. Silence. Then Eminel whispered, I'm in. The next night, the plan began. Two strangers, brought in from a distant town, no ties to the palace, no history in Kambora. Their mission? Slip into the presidential garden, poison the tea Divine usually brought to the president each morning. But fate had other plans. Divine, tired from her lessons, had forgotten her drawing book. She went back to the garden to get it. That's when she saw them. Two figures moving low among the flowers. She froze, then screamed. Guards rushed in, the men were caught, beaten, interrogated, and the truth spilled out. We were paid, one sobbed, by a man named Eminel, and another from the government. They told us to poison the president through the girl. When President Torians heard the names, his heart shattered. Eminel, he whispered. Beside him, Divine stood silently. She reached for his hand. I'm sorry, Papa, she said. He looked down at her. You saved me again. Radio stations buzzed. TV anchors whispered in disbelief. Social media exploded with one name, Divine. People in the markets talked. Women in villages gathered to pray. Elders in faraway towns asked their grandchildren, tell us more about this girl in the palace. They had heard rumors before that she came from a graveyard, that she was cursed, that she didn't belong. But now they knew the truth. She had saved their president. Twice. That afternoon, President Tarians held a national press conference. The palace steps were lined with guards. Reporters from all over Kambora crowded together. He walked out slowly. By his side, Divine, small, calm, standing tall with nothing but grace. I've heard the whispers, Torians began. Some say she's a ghost. Some say she's a spy. But I say, she is a blessing. He placed a hand on Divine's shoulder. This girl has saved me more than once. She stopped fake contracts, exposed lies buried deep in my government. She's asked questions grown men were too afraid to ask. The crowd fell silent. She is not a ghost. She is not a curse. She is a child with a heart of gold. I will protect her like my own. The silence broke into applause. Loud, long, real. It echoed through the palace gates, through the city streets, through the hills and valleys of Kambora. That night, the phrase, "We stand with Divine," trended across every platform. School children drew pictures of her. Artists painted murals. Mothers wept with pride. Fathers told their sons, "Courage doesn't wait for age." In the countryside, drums beat. Songs were sung. Candles were lit. The people had found a new symbol. Not a crown, not a flag, but a little girl, with nothing but truth in her voice. Later that evening, Divine sat quietly on a bench in the palace garden. The stars above blinked gently. The wind whispered through the trees. President Torians joined her. He sat beside her, silent for a moment. "Divine," he said, "you have many enemies now." She nodded. "But do you want to stop?" he asked. She looked up at him. "No, Papa. If I stop, the bad people win." He smiled. "That's my girl." For the first time in many nights, President Tarian slept peacefully. Not because the threats were gone. Not because the fight was over, but because he knew someone small, someone fierce, someone unshaken was watching his back. And now an entire country was watching hers. Weeks passed, then months. But the impact of that one little girl only grew stronger. Inside the grand walls of the palace, everything changed. Files were no longer dropped on desks and signed blindly. They were read, reviewed, questioned. Ministers, who once relaxed behind titles, now prepared answers with care. Lazy officials became alert. Corruption became a lot harder to hide, because now every document, every proposal, every deal had to pass through a new pair of eyes that had once stared at a grave, eyes that now stared down greed. Divine didn't shout, she didn't command, she simply asked, "Why? What is this for? Does this help the people?" And just like that, people who never cared started thinking again. In schools, her story became a lesson. Truth needs no age, the blackboards read. Teachers told their students, courage doesn't wear a uniform. Even lawmakers began to speak differently. You never know when Divine is watching, they'd say. And they meant it. She sat quietly in meetings, took notes, listened. But when she spoke, everyone listened. She didn't belong to any party, any group, any interest. She belonged to truth, but not everyone was happy. Behind the scenes, some still grumbled. She's just a child. She doesn't belong here. She makes us look foolish. And yet, they feared her honesty more than any threat, because honesty is harder to fight. One evening, Divine stood alone by the palace balcony, looking out over the capital, lights twinkling like stars. President Tarians joined her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more for this country than most adults," he said. She didn't reply, just looked ahead. "What do you see out there?" he asked. She paused, then answered softly, "Hope." He nodded. "That's what you gave us." From the graveyard of sorrow, she had risen, not with revenge, but with reason, not with anger, but with courage. Her name had become more than a name. It had become a light, a reminder that even in broken places, a voice of truth can rise. That night, as the stars watched over Kambora, Divine whispered, "Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Papa. I'm safe." She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was ready to keep asking questions, to keep protecting what mattered, to keep being divine. And so it ends. Not with a crown, not with riches, but with a child, looking out at a city she helped save. From a graveyard to the palace, from silence to power. Divine became the voice so many had lost. She didn't rise for fame. She didn't fight for titles. She simply stood for truth, and truth stood with her. If this story stirred something in your heart, let it live beyond this screen. Share it, talk about it, teach it, because somewhere right now another Divine is cleaning a grave, hearing the world call her cursed, when in truth, she might just be the one who saves it. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if a child asked the Question no one else dared to? If this made you cry, smile, or clench your fist, click like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the world needs more stories like this. This was Celebrity Undercover Stories, and this time, the undercover hero was just 9 years old.